You're listening to Missing Persons, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, DNA ID, Zodiac Speaking, Scene of the Crime,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime,
Citizen Detective, and
Campus Killings.
All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not necessarily represent those of the podcast, its creators, or sponsors. If you would like to discuss a missing persons case on this podcast, please be sure to visit missingpersonspodcast.net. This episode may contain unsettling or disturbing subject matter. Listener discretion is advised.
If you'd like to support Missing Persons and get VIP access to things like ad-free listening, early preview episodes, and bonus content of not only this show, but for every other podcast on the AbJack network of indie podcasts, consider subscribing to the show with an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcast. For only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, you'll unlock a variety of listener benefits, and you'll be supporting the show in the process. Your support is greatly appreciated.
Welcome to Missing Persons, a podcast dedicated to spreading the word about people who have vanished under mysterious or unexplained circumstances and the family members who are looking for answers. I'm Jess Betancourt.
And I'm Mike Morford. Together, we created this podcast to help give a voice to people who continue to search for their missing loved ones. In some cases, even after decades have gone by. In each episode, you'll hear from Jess giving listeners the backstory and the basic facts of the disappearance.
Then Mike will speak with someone who's intimately connected to the missing person, and his guest will share their story with us. So sit back and enjoy this episode, and who knows, maybe you can help us find someone who's missing. 24-year-old Jennifer Kesse disappeared from Orlando, Florida on Tuesday, January 24th, 2006. Just to get this out of the way immediately, this is not the kind of case where there is any question about whether the victim left on her own. Jennifer was an exceptional person, an ambitious businesswoman, the youngest manager of process engineering her large corporate employer, CFI Westgate Resorts, had ever promoted to that position. She was beloved by her friends and family alike. Her girlfriends from University of Central Florida, where Jennifer majored in finance, said that she was the most loyal and reliable person they knew. She loved to dance, watch her beloved New York Giants, make mac and cheese, and have fun. But she was also dependable, self-confident, and mature. There has never been any question of Jennifer engaging in high-risk activities. Even at her young age, she had just purchased her first condo at the new Mosaic at Millenia complex across the street from the upscale mall at Millenia. She had moved in over Thanksgiving weekend 2005. The area was up and coming. Jennifer's condo unit, number 2226 in Building 22, was in a large complex that was partially still being built and partially in the midst of being converted from apartments to condos. Most of the units were still unoccupied. Jennifer had very few neighbors, with only one other unit on her floor occupied at the time, and the building had little to no security, no cameras, no guard shack at the entrance, nothing. Jennifer's parents, Drew and Joyce Kesse, taught Jennifer and her brother Logan from an early age about personal safety after they were mugged at gunpoint. Jennifer, a Law and Order SVU junkie, always walked to and from her car purposely, locked her doors, and stayed on the phone with family or a friend when workers were working in her condo unit. She even carried pepper spray. Jennifer had a boyfriend of over a year, Englishman Rob Allen. Rob was older than Jennifer, but the two had a great relationship. I'm going to say right off the bat that Rob is not a suspect in this case. While Jennifer lived in Orlando, Rob lived in Fort Lauderdale. The two were quite serious, and the distance was a challenge. They alternated weekends visiting each other. Their routine was to make the long drive to the other's home on Friday after work and stay until Monday morning, get up early, and go straight to the office after the long commute. This was customary for them, and anyone who was watching Jennifer would know this. On the weekend immediately prior to her disappearance, Jennifer and Rob had actually gone away together for a long weekend to St. Croix with some family friends of Rob's. Jennifer drove to Rob's on Wednesday after work, they flew out, and they flew back into Miami after a canceled flight on Sunday night. A friend picked them up and took them back to Fort Lauderdale. On Monday morning, as usual, Rob gassed up Jennifer's car for her and she left early for the approximately 3-hour drive to her office at CFI Westgate in Ocoee. Monday was a normal workday for Jennifer. According to her coworkers, everything was routine. Jennifer worked a full day, said goodbye to her office friends, and left around 6. Toll records show that she drove straight home, a 12-mile drive, hitting the usual toll at 6:15 p.m. On the way, she talked to both her parents on the phone as well as her brother Logan, who was living with Drew and Joyce at the time. She raved about her trip. When she got back to the Mosaic, we assume, but don't know, that Jennifer parked in her own designated parking spot near the bottom of the stairs that led up to the second floor where her condo was. This was the kind of building where all the units have doors leading to an open-air hallway. Jennifer's brother Logan and his friend Travis, a longtime Kesse family friend, had driven up from Bradenton while Jennifer was away with Rob, and with her permission stayed at her condo. Jennifer had given Logan a set of keys. They hung out with friends over the weekend, including an ex-boyfriend of Jennifer's named Matt. Matt lived in Orlando, so he didn't stay over, but there is no question that he was in Jennifer's condo over the weekend. Logan and Travis left on Sunday, and inadvertently, Travis left his work cell phone at the condo. Logan told Jennifer this on the phone, and she promised to FedEx it the next morning, Tuesday. That never happened. On Monday night, after retrieving her mail from the central office mailboxes, Jennifer hung out at her apartment and talked on the landline phone with her best friend Lauren. Her cell phone didn't work well inside the condo. They talked about her trip, and Jennifer told her that the distance issue was starting to be a problem in her relationship. That night, Jennifer also talked to Rob on the phone. They talked nightly as a matter of routine. The call took place at 9:57 p.m. Rob said later that the conversation was a bit tense as they were disagreeing over the future of their relationship. That conversation is the last one anyone had with Jennifer Kesse. There is no evidence that she left the condo that night. Her credit and debit cards were unused, and no food garbage was found in the trash in her unit. The next morning, Tuesday, Rob expected a phone call from Jennifer on her way to work. Again, this was part of their routine. She usually called him on her drive in between 7:30 and 7:45 a.m. But this time, she didn't call. Rob was busy and chalked it up to Jennifer being busy as well. She had an important meeting at the office at 11 that morning. But she didn't show up for the meeting, and that was not like Jennifer. The meeting was on her calendar, so her colleagues were aware that she knew about it. She wasn't answering either her home or cell phone, which went directly to voicemail. Alarmed, her boss, a friend of the Kesses, called Jennifer's parents, and when they couldn't reach Jennifer, who always answered their calls, they went into crisis mode. Logan and Travis jumped in the car and drove to Orlando. Drew and Joyce drove separately, calling everyone they could think of, including hospitals, friends, and Rob. Because they were several hours away, they called the Mosaic management office and asked someone to go check Jennifer's condo. The property manager told them that Jennifer's black Chevy Malibu was not in its parking spot, and upon entering the apartment with the management key, told the Kesses that nothing looked out of place, but Jennifer was not there. Logan and Travis got to the condo first and went inside around 3 o'clock. They were soon joined by Drew and Joyce at 3:15, and Rob soon thereafter. They found Jennifer's suitcase from her trip still packed in the hallway. The lights were off. A damp towel was draped over the washer-dryer. The shower corners were wet, and Jennifer's PJs were on the bathroom floor. A work outfit was laid out on the bed, and the clothes she wore to work on Monday were on the back of a chair. The bathroom looked like someone had gotten dressed, put on makeup, and blow-dried their hair, like any woman would before going to work. Jennifer's pepper spray, given to her by Drew, sat on the counter. She had had to leave it behind for her St. Croix trip and had neglected to put it back on her keychain. Jennifer's Verizon flip phone, purse, briefcase, and car keys were all missing. Some new brown alligator pumps she had recently bought were missing, as was a tan work outfit. Her glasses were there on the sink, but her contact lens case was empty. Travis's Nextel cell phone was missing. Jennifer's car was missing, and Jennifer was missing too. The Kesses wasted no time in calling the police. I'm not going to get into the whole saga of how the Orlando PD screwed up this case. Officers were very slow to take Jennifer's absence seriously. The Kesses got the old, "oh, she had a fight with her boyfriend, she'll be back" song and dance. Eventually, police came to realize that Jennifer was not missing voluntarily. Much was done and much was not done on her case. One of the things that screwed the investigation up early on was bogus cell tower information that led police to believe that Jennifer had been out and about on Monday night, late. They were convinced that she'd gone out to party, and that threw off the whole timeline. Jennifer's parents were adamant that that was out of the question. Jennifer was a professional who took her work very seriously and never would have gone out to party on a Monday night alone, especially when she'd gotten up that morning at 5 a.m. It was later acknowledged that the cell tower information was erroneous. Apparently, a combination of poor technology and a tower being out of commission. And it is now accepted, and I firmly believe, that Jennifer spent Monday night alone in her condo and woke up and got ready for work on Tuesday morning. As the Kesses were scrambling to get to Jennifer's condo right around noon on Tuesday, something was happening, but no one would know about it for 2 more days. Jennifer's black Malibu pulled into the parking lot at the seedy Huntington on the Green apartment complex, a mile from the Mosaic, in a much sketchier area. The car parked in the visitor lot near the pool. The driver sat in the car for 32 seconds, perhaps wiping things down, and then emerged and walked down the sidewalk along the pool fence and out of view. The driver was not Jennifer. How do we know all this? Well, after the bolo went out for Jennifer in her car at 9 p.m. on Tuesday the 24th, someone called the police on Thursday and reported that a black Chevy Malibu with the missing woman's license plate number was parked at Huntington on the Green. Sure enough, police arrived and verified that it was Jennifer's locked car. They got the doors open and made Rob come over to the complex to witness as they opened the trunk, wanting to see his reaction if Jennifer was inside. She wasn't. All that was found in the car was an expensive pair of sunglasses, some flip-flops, a phone charging cord, and a DVD player that Rob had given Jennifer. The car was towed away and processed, but reportedly, all that was found was a hair. There was no evidence of anything happening inside the vehicle, and no helpful prints were found. The fuel level in the car was consistent with Jennifer gassing up in Fort Lauderdale and driving to work in Ocoee and then home. Whoever drove her car did not drive it far, and it did not pass through any tolls. Police did get a tip that some residents across the street from Jennifer saw a black sedan driving erratically from the Mosaic at Millenia early Tuesday morning. Police did get an interesting break. The Huntington on the Green complex had 30-year-old rooftop-mounted cameras that shot not surveillance video, but a photo every 2 to 3 seconds. The resulting footage pulled by police is a herky-jerky series of still shots that show a figure dressed in white or a very pale shirt and pants and black shoes emerge from Jennifer's car and walk away from it. The shots are grainy and poor quality, but that's not the reason that even NASA technology has failed to identify the driver of the car or even determine whether it's male or female. The driver's face is obscured in each still shot by a post on the pool fence. It's a cruel, cruel blow for the Kesse family to have the person driving Jennifer's car, a very likely suspect or accomplice in her abduction, caught on camera and have it lead nowhere. The OPD did bring in Bo, the tracking dog, to sniff Jennifer's car seat and then follow a trail on foot that led them over a mile straight back to the Mosaic at Millenia, entering the complex through a hole in the fence. This is one of the reasons that many followers of Jennifer's case believe that one of the workers at the condo unit was responsible for her disappearance. The dog tracked someone back to the building, supposedly right to the staircase that Jennifer would have descended that morning to get to her car. Jennifer had told several members of her family and Rob and some of her friends that she was made very uncomfortable by certain workers at the condo complex who would leer at her and even make gestures and rude sounds as she walked past. There are varying reports about whether she ever filed a formal complaint with the property management company, but as a young woman living alone, it must have been unsettling to be the object of such unwanted and demonstrated attention. Further, Travis and Logan had seen a white van parked next to Jennifer's empty parking spot with 2 workers sitting in it when they arrived at Jen's condo that day she went missing. The police attempted to locate all the workers at the Mosaic, but unfortunately, it was an impossible task. The contractors who hired the maintenance crews and ground crews and construction and renovation crews did not always keep records. Frankly, sometimes employed illegal workers, paid some workers under the table, and even permitted some of them to squat in empty units in the complex while working there. Reports are that after Jennifer's abduction became big news, many of the workers scattered to the wind, and we may never know who they were. I'll come back to those workers in a minute. I'm not going to be able to discuss all the red herrings that have plagued Jennifer's case over the years. There were many, from supposed sightings at other condo complexes, to criminals making apologies online for harming her, to rolled-up carpeting dumped in lakes. Police also followed leads that seemed to point to an obsessed coworker and to her ex, Matt, who was seen very drunk at the Blue Martini bar across from Jennifer's place on Monday night, even though he didn't live close by. None of these leads panned out. Jennifer's parents, Drew and Joyce, worked with the OPD for years, but eventually became frustrated and then angered by the lack of progress and transparency in their daughter's case. They felt that the case was essentially stagnant, so in 2018, they sued the Orlando PD, accusing them of negligence and seeking to declare the case a cold case to take control of the case file and the investigation. They won, and in reviewing the file, they learned that no reports had been written on it since 2010. In March 2019, the Kesses settled their lawsuit against the OPD. The parties agreed that the OPD would no longer investigate the case and would hand over the entire 14,000-page case file to the Kesses for more than $20,000 in photocopying fees. The Kesses, begrudgingly aided by a GoFundMe to help pay their legal team and investigators and the copying fees, started combing through the file. They had to go back to the OPD repeatedly to request unredacted copies, since blacked out information did them no good. And one thing they found was not known before, even to them. Photos of Jennifer's car, after it was impounded by police, show what are clearly hand marks and scuffle marks in the dust on the hood of the Malibu. In the Kesses' opinion, the photos prove that Jennifer was attacked at her car that day in January 2006. That morning she got up, showered, got dressed, and left for work carrying her purse with her cell phone and Travis's cell phone, her keys, which she used to lock the condo door, her iPod, and her briefcase. None of these items were ever found. Someone waylaid Jennifer in the quiet, empty parking lot that morning, smashing her onto the hood of her car and, I believe, throwing her into another vehicle. This is why none of the things she was carrying were found in her car, but other personal possessions were. She never made it into the car that day. But now someone had access to her keys and drove her vehicle to the Huntington on the Green. This means possibly that more than one person was involved in Jennifer's abduction. Someone drove off with her and someone else drove her car and parked it at the Huntington on the Green to make it appear that Jennifer had left for work that day. It could all have been one person who grabbed Jennifer around 7:30 a.m., drove off with her in his vehicle, stashed her, and then came back and took her away. But that is a lot of back and forth. Either way, this was a planned, well-executed abduction by people who had been watching Jennifer and knew her routine. Even though she was more safety-conscious than most, the petite blonde had no chance against her attackers that early Tuesday morning, and no one was around to hear her screams. No trace of Jennifer Joyce Kesse has ever been found. This parking lot abduction by someone knowledgeable about Jennifer's routine aligns with one man who is considered a person of interest in the case. This is a worker at the Mosaic named Chino. Chino's name was given to Orlando Police Detective Joel Wright by a member of the housekeeping staff at the Mosaic at Millenia. Wright showed a photo from the video of the man who parked Jen's car at the Huntington on the Green on the day she vanished, and the housekeeper said, "That looks like Chino." Chino was also the subject of a crime line tip called in about the case. Chino was a worker who was squatting at the Mosaic at Millenia while working construction there. Wright was told by the head of maintenance at the unit that Chino indeed worked the week that Jen vanished. He was interviewed by police, but it's unclear whether they were able to obtain any information from him. There are also reports that he passed a polygraph and that he ended up doing some prison time for an unrelated sexual battery. Jennifer's parents, Drew and Joyce, have set the standard for how the parents of missing children, whether adult or minor, can and should actively influence the trajectory of a bungled investigation. From minute one, the Kesses demanded that Jennifer's case receive the undivided attention of the assigned investigators. They dogged the police for answers, advocated loudly and often for their daughter's case, tracked down leads, maintained websites and blogs, kept records, and inundated the public with flyers, posters, bus ads, and billboards about Jennifer. They wore wires, visited death row, conducted searches and hired dive teams, and answered every email and message. They simply demanded that her case be prioritized, and they are still doing so 17 years later. In 2022, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement commenced a cold case review of the Kesse case. And in a recent development, the family learned that despite the Orlando PD telling them that there was no relevant DNA, they have learned that DNA evidence was obtained from Jennifer's vehicle, DNA that can be tested. Drew Kesse said in 2022 when the FDLE got the case, quote, "We have never felt so hopeful and optimistic. This is Jennifer's best chance of being found," end quote. Unfortunately, that was a year ago. The FDLE has not shared with the family what the status of their investigation is. The family feels strongly that they did their part in providing the law enforcement agency with the tools needed to solve the case. It remains to be seen whether they will do so. Mike Morford sat down with Bill Gilmore, Jennifer's uncle, to talk about his niece's case. That conversation is coming up after a word from our sponsors.
Hi, Bill, and welcome to Missing Persons. I want to thank you for coming on to talk about your niece Jennifer's case with us and helping provide insights from inside the family's perspective.
Mike, I'm honored, and I just appreciate the opportunity. Anything we can do to keep Jen's case in the forefront will only help us in the long run.
Absolutely. And we're definitely going to talk about the case, the clues, and then I want to, talk about a book that you've written about the case. Before we dive into all of that, can you start off with telling us a little bit about Jen herself, what she was like?
Yeah, I actually had mentioned this. I was talking to somebody on Sunday. When Jen was born, my sister and I, we lived on the same cul-de-sac in Barnegat, New Jersey. And so Jen was the first of the grandchildren in the family. And she just was, the beautiful little blonde-haired girl. And it was just like, she was like ours, right, up until the time that they moved to Virginia, because we didn't have kids for several years later. But it's, when you reflect back on, it's just hard to imagine that, all those happy moments, watching somebody grow up. Then eventually, obviously, they moved to Florida. Between high school and then college and starting a career, it's, she always had, and I guess it's a firstborn, she always had a way about her. There was a confidence and a clarity about what it was that she would be doing. And she pretty much stuck to that.
And, obviously as she became an adult, she's successful. She's out doing her own thing. She gets her own place. Did she stay pretty close to the family? Were all of you in regular contact with her?
Well, my sister and brother-in-law, obviously the closest, because from our perspective, once they moved from New Jersey, the first stop was to Virginia. So that limits that. I mean, we could still drive to Virginia, but not as often. And when they moved to Florida, obviously that changed the dynamic a little bit. We didn't move to Florida until 1999. So it was only several years before all of this basically took place. So that's the challenge. And I was saying this to somebody recently, that as families move and disperse, you lose that closeness that you once had, because you just don't have those opportunities to just pop in, or a quick drive to see them. But, you share through pictures, conversations. Today, it's even easier, right? We can do Zoom and FaceTime and things like that. But back in those days, it was a little bit more challenging. But my sister and brother-in-law were very intentional about, keeping their family close, Logan and Jen, setting the tone as parents for honest conversations with the kids, so that there wasn't anything that was off limits that they could share with in a vulnerable way, so that Joyce and Drew could help them. Right. As parents, we don't want to have those barriers where our kids are fearful of talking to us or sharing with us. And they did a great job of making sure that wasn't true. That both Logan and Jen knew that they always had an ear that would be listening and not judgmental. And there was, without a doubt, there was that unconditional love.
It's good to have that support and have that in place. And it seemed like Jen was excelling. She had a good job and, her own place. What was, in a general perspective, what was going on in her life right before all this happened? What kind of place was she in?
He was in a great place. I mean, ironically, she was up at our house. We lived in Lake Mary, so we weren't that far from Orlando. My son, Matthew, my oldest, his birthday is on December 28th. My mom happened to be in town. So Jen had come up and we all had gone out to dinner on the 28th. And, sharing. She had Rob in her life. Everything was moving. I mean, you think about it as a 24-year-old, you're in a good place with your career. You got your first new car. You've now purchased a home at that age, a condo. Everything seemed to be going great. And I will say that one of the biggest challenges that we had, not less than a month later, was after we learned that she was abducted, trying to go through photos to find a photo of her not smiling. And so as we were going through some of the film that we had developed from the gathering we had on the 28th of December of 2005, I took a picture of Jen while she had food in her mouth, right? So it was like mid chewing, but it was literally the only photo we had where she was not smiling. Because one of the things that was asked of us was, it's great that you have all these photos of her smiling, but that's not what someone's going to see. Yeah, right? If somebody's going to observe her, she's not smiling. So that was the picture that we ultimately began to use on the posters and so forth.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the weird challenges. You don't think of something so little having to find the right photo to use for a missing person's case. It's probably not something that you were ever planning on.
No, exactly. But after the fact, you realize, now you realize that you're always good to have a variety of pictures of people just in case.
Yeah. And if you can, would you give us a rundown of the timeline as you've established the correct timeline of Jen's known last activities and when it was that she lost contact with friends and family?
Yeah, I mean, the best that I'm aware of, obviously through conversation and so forth, was that it was sometime around 10 o'clock ish on Monday evening. She had a full day at work. She had driven up that morning for work from South Florida. So she was just winding down, making the normal phone calls that she would make, talk to my sister, talk to my brother-in-law, talk to Rob. And then that was it. After that, the next call that my sister and brother-in-law get was in the morning of Tuesday, the 24th, from a close friend who was also the CFO for Central Florida Investments and the Westgate Resorts, who said, he called them and said, hey, have you heard from Jen? She didn't show up for a meeting this morning. And they're like, no, come in, because that's not Jennifer. And if she was going to be late for something, or there was any change of anything, she would call and let you know, or, text and let you know. So it was completely out of character for her not to say something to somebody at work about running late or anything. So that set alarms off immediately. So my sister and brother-in-law, and then Logan found out about it. They're all trying to call her cell number, and it was immediately going to voicemail. It was about that same time that my phone is ringing, but I'm in the air. I'm flying to New Jersey on business. So I didn't even see the missed calls until I landed in Newark. And then Joyce and I continue to play telephone tag until 6 o'clock on Tuesday, the 24th. And that's when I learned that she was missing. So, I immediately made plans, flew back home, and arrived at the condo in the morning of Wednesday. And it was just, you can imagine, and I know from your past experience, it was just, there was a level of chaos, anxiety, fear. Your emotions are running wild about what could have potentially have happened. And then by that time, Drew had already had the posters, flyers made up. So we just started doing the natural things, was hitting the streets and so forth. By that evening, because I had been involved in a number of political campaigns, I immediately realized, I said, we need to be a little bit more intentional with some of the things that we're doing. So we got street maps and we actually gridded streets and we broke them up to the couple of dozen people that were there. And we just started because our first objective was to try to find her car. So we just started concentrically from the condo and just moved outside of that. My sister Margie, myself, and my wife happened to be on the opposite corner of Huntington and Green. And it was about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. We finally said, you know what? Let's just stop for the night. And then the next morning we'll go back. We'll go to the other quadrant, which would have been Huntington on the Green. And of course, that morning was the morning that the news broke that somebody at Huntington on the Green said, hey, you know, that car that you've got, you're showing on the news, I think it's parked in front of my apartment. And then that changed the entire dynamic because now all of a sudden different levels of emotions hit because now we're all gathered outside her condo waiting for the definitive. It was definitely Jen's car. And then it's like, all right, now we have the car, but where's Jen? And then it wasn't long after that, dogs are out, helicopters are flying overhead. It was just, it was just wild.
Say it seems like it went from 0 to 60 really quickly. Even the investigation, even you getting flyers and getting the word out and stuff, it doesn't seem like you sat around wondering what to do. It seems like you guys jumped into action really quickly. Oh,
absolutely. I mean, and I think that's what's when we look back on this and that, everything that as a family you could probably think to do was done, and so we can't look back and we won't look back and say, well, it wasn't like we didn't. I mean, we jumped immediately. So, between that, even in telling the police that, we would contribute so that there could be more of a reward money, all that kind of stuff was all offered right off the bat.
And I want to back up for a second. So obviously, everybody knows that this isn't like Jen. She doesn't show up for work.
Right.
Everybody's worried. How quickly was it Drew that went to her house and found out that she wasn't there?
Yeah. So I think I'm not, again, now it's 17 years later. I can't remember if Logan arrived. I think Joyce and Drew arrived together just ahead of Logan. And obviously when they get into the condo, what they found was what you would have expected to find. The shower was wet. The towel was wet. There was a couple of outfits out, like on any given day, you're trying to decide the outfit you're going to wear. So something happened from the moment she left that condo and her car. And it wasn't until obviously we all arrived there and you begin to get the full picture of what was happening with the condo conversions. I mean, the building that she was living in, her floor, it's these open breezeways on either end, so staircases on either end. She was on the second floor. And there were these concrete columns about midpoint on the floor. So you began to see, well, somebody could literally, because of the lighting and everything else, somebody could be behind one of these stanchions and you might not know it. But and she was she was occupying the only unit on her floor at the time.
Yeah.
And I think there might have been a few other people in the building, but on her floor, she was the only one that was occupying a unit.
Not an abundance of people that could have seen something easily then.
No, a lot of work vans around, a lot of workmen. I mean, there was when we arrived, you could just see there, there's all this stuff was a regular routine there.
And just going back to the inside of the condo, was there any signs of a struggle, anything unusual in there, or did whatever happened or definitely happen outside of the condo?
Yeah, to Joyce and Drew's, when they first got there, there was nothing out of the ordinary in the condo.
We touched on the car. You mentioned finding the car was important, obviously. When are the police heavily involved right away? Because we hear stories about sometimes they say they're an adult, they can go off, if they want, and if they don't come back in a couple of days, come back to us. How quickly did the police get involved? That's one thing I wanted to talk to you. How fast did they spring into action?
Well, my recollection is, as you stated, the 0 to 60 occurred when somebody called in and said that car is sitting in front of our unit. That's when everything changed. I think the level of seriousness accelerated. And, we don't fault law enforcement because I'm sure every family probably says, well, that's not like so-and-so. This is out of character for them. But truly, when you have the family saying that and you have the employer saying exactly the same thing, we would have hoped that they would have taken a little bit more serious. But then again, within that first 24, 48 hours, I mean, I don't know what more you've been in law enforcement. I don't know what more would have been done, until you found something like the car.
Yeah, it's definitely a big warning sign that you've got this car where it shouldn't be. And
right. 1 mile from where she lived, it was just really hot. Yeah.
And what was the condition of the car? Was it locked up, and what was found inside of it?
My understanding was it was locked up. I don't have the details of what was inside. I know that nothing of Jen's was inside, right? So they didn't find, her purse or anything that she would have likely have had with her. That was not in the car. But I don't know the details of what they did find.
And obviously, I don't know how quickly this happened, and maybe you can clarify this too. How fast did that infamous video of the person parking her car there, how fast did that come into play?
My recollection seems to be it was relatively quick, because I think once they realized that there were cameras, security cameras on property, they got those tapes. There was some issue in the beginning about not knowing if the timing was right, because and I can't remember if I recall correctly, they weren't sure. Because there was something about the timestamps that they weren't exactly sure about. There was a question as to whether or not the timestamp had been changed to reflect daylight savings, not daylight savings. And again, I don't know in the big picture that if that was overly critical, but it was sometime, if I recall, the timestamp was somewhere around noon to 1 o'clock was the timestamp that was on the film at the time. But I think what we always thought that was odd about when we had a chance to look at the video, and it was shown obviously on the news, is that the person pulls into the spot, but not correctly. So they back out and pull back in, to leave it lined up right, sit for a few seconds before they exited the car. And then a different camera picks up the infamous, fence that blocks their face. But, when originally there was the indication that there was not any DNA or anything of consequence to be found in or on the car, it just seemed a little bit odd, because I mean, even though the surveillance film, the security film was not great quality, it didn't appear that the person was wearing gloves. So how would you drive the car and not potentially leave something behind, right?
Sure. That's one thing that's been interesting. And I wonder, just spitballing, but maybe those few seconds that they were in the car after they did park it, maybe they wiped down the steering wheel and the door handles.
I mean, it didn't seem like that would have been that amount of time that you could have done that earlier correctly. But yeah, you're right. It's possible.
Yeah, but it's frustrating nonetheless to not find any physical evidence of someone in their DNA, fingerprints, what have you. And then even more frustrating when that video seems to cut out their face. And, it seems like maybe this case might be solved if that piece of fence wasn't there.
And I've always maintained, that there's two people that are missing, because that person's never been identified. And, I've spent a lot of years working in the field of biomechanics with the use of motion analysis technology from a medical perspective. And obviously motion analysis is highly used in gaming and entertaining today. But we have all been in situations where we have recognized somebody in the distance by the way in which they were moving before we actually saw them clearly. So I always believed that there was enough information shown that somebody would have said, that looks an awful lot like so-and-so. And we never got anything.
And that's very frustrating when there's cases where you have that kind of information. I on my other podcast.
Yep. I lose you.
On camera, the killer was caught on camera, and the surveillance is just not clear enough to see it. And then there's the infamous Delphi murders in Indiana of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. Their killers caught talking on audio and camera. So, and that case just recently, took years to get an arrest in that case. So it is frustrating, and I imagine the police were probably frustrated too when you have a case where there's some kind of clue like audio or surveillance or something, yet it doesn't lead anywhere.
Exactly. And I'll tell you, the other thing that was, I had a recall for a conversation during the crime conference, that when you consider that, and it was, I think within weeks, it was pretty quick when there was a lot of tips that were coming in, but nothing was really fleshing out as being of any significance, that Dave Siegel with Westgate Resorts put up $1 million reward. And I mean, we're sitting there going, holy mackerel, $1 million, that's got to move the needle, right? Someone's going to come forward and give some credible information. Nothing.
Yeah. You would think that would bring out everybody out of the woodwork, just turning in the wrong people just to turn in somebody to try and get that reward.
Exactly.
And to not have that result in anything, maybe that means that this person just somehow just didn't register with anybody enough that when they see that video, or maybe the right person still somehow hasn't seen it and doesn't even have a chance to say, hey, that looks like so-and-so. But they're, again, just for listeners, refresh our memories of the description of what we could tell about this person.
Yeah, in black and white film. So the person looked like they were their hair was either in some type of a bun or they were wearing some type of a hat. And there was always speculation whether it was potentially somebody in the restaurant business or whatever. It looked like there was moments where it looked like the pants could have been like those old white painter's pants. I don't even know if they even make those anymore, but I can remember owning a pair. But then the question came up as, well, that quality of camera might have distorted the colors anyway. In other words, that may not have really been a true representation of the color palette. So, there was just so many things that were not going in our favor relative to the quality of the film. That just, again, that's just another part of the source of frustration.
And did they determine on approximate height?
Yeah, if I recall, that was definitely short stature, probably somewhere in the 5'5" to 5'7" ish. I think that was based on the height of the fence and the person's relative position to the fence. So it was probably a pretty good estimate.
Yeah, and that in itself is a big clue, because if that's an adult man, that's very short for an adult man. So that would seem to whittle down potential suspects a lot.
Right, and also based on what was seen, it would have been of a slender build. Yeah.
So this is a pretty small or petite man. If it's a man, assuming it's a man.
Right.
You think that would quickly whittle down potential suspects, but obviously that to this date hasn't helped, along with the lack of fingerprints and physical evidence and stuff.
No, and the speculations, where was that person walking to? And, when we were there, when we were on site, we're looking at potential directions. And it just so happened that I guess that would have been, let me just if I reorient myself correct. I think the Huntington on the Green was on the northwest corner of Texas and Americana. And so just outside the Texas entrance to the apartment complex, there was a bus stop. And then across the street was a shopping center. So, we had speculated, well, was that person, walking to get to a bus stop and then took off on a bus? Or did they meet somebody across the street in the shopping center? Because at that time, that intersection, certainly wasn't one of the nicer areas in that area, but it wasn't like on the same side of the street on Texas, there wasn't really much else there, because then you would start moving towards a residential community. But on the opposite side of Texas was that shopping center.
Yeah. And that's frustrating. And one other question along these lines, did they, as far as did they use any kind of dogs, scent tracking, anything like that? And what were the results?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the dogs did pick up scents that was a path from the condo to the apartments But then from the apartments on, that there was some disconnect. I mean, not really sure why that was, because we know that the person walked from the car in a particular direction. And for what, at least my recollection was, there was nothing of consequence that came from that either. One of our neighbors, Terry Brewer, in Lake Mary, was part of the Mountic group in Orange County. And so, he reached out and got his team, and they decided to do a quote unquote training exercise and took the horses into some of these areas that would be a little bit more challenging by, a small vehicle or ATV or something like that. I mean, when I think back on those early days and weeks, you were 100% right. 0 to 60, it just was full bore, and yet nothing really of any importance came out of all of that activity, all of that searching. It's baffling.
I just wanted to extend out a little bit of the aftermath, looking for this potential person that's caught on video. Did they look at other area surveillance cameras, and did anything, as far as in the area, pick up that same person after you dropped the car off?
The answer is, yeah, they did look. And I believe there was a couple of gas stations that had security film, but no, to my knowledge, that they find anybody that looked anything like that person.
Very frustrating.
Because if you remember, there was, in the case, there were situations that had been reported that there was somebody that was living in the community across. So the entrance and exit on near the mall Millenia where Jen lived, across that was a subdivision. And somebody had reported that they thought they saw some type of a struggle in the car, and remember the car heading east, which would have been in the direction of Huntington on the Green. And then there were other people that reported that they thought they saw the car at the gas station. So there was just, there was just a lot of that. And I think that's what helped prompt them to look for those kinds of surveillance or security film. But nothing of any consequence that I recall was told to us.
So this case had gone from 0 to 60. You've got the person on video that is of interest that police want to talk to, but he's not found. How quickly did you feel that the case began to stall or cool off, whatever terminology you want to phrase it as?
Well, without a doubt, I mean, when you realize that the helicopters are flying, because obviously in Florida, and we know there's been a lot of big name cases of cars that end up submerged in water. So, a lot of times helicopters are looking to see if you can find a hood of a car. So helicopters are out looking. That was one of my initial thoughts was, could she have veered off into a body of water? Then it submerges, and then it'll take a while before that would be found. Between that, the horse teams going out, there was just so many groups that organized Child Watch. I mean, a lot of different organizations. The group from Texas, EquiSearch, came out. I mean, when all of these people are coming and diverging on an area and just literally tearing apart, gridding us out. I mean, at one point we had a master map that Drew was maintaining that was showing where everybody was going, what was being done, where volunteers were handing out flyers. And then days turn into weeks, and then it's a month, and still nothing of any consequence. That's why I think when you begin to realize, I mean, I know we all talked about it, like this is going to be the long haul. I mean, we had no idea of knowing that it would now be 17 and a half, almost 18 years later. Yeah. But quickly we ultimately, and I think it was probably Drew, but there was a connection made with the mall Millenia, and they agreed to offer up their community rooms that we could use as a staging place, because obviously at some point it just wasn't going to be practical continue to stage activity from the apartment complex. But that was great. So then we started teaming up with organizations like Child Watch and others, and we started doing community promotional events, anything to get awareness on Jen, but also to help other people become aware of how they need to be protecting their kids, things like fingerprinting services. So there was a lot of those kinds of things that we were doing just to keep the general awareness out there. And even after all of that, the needle didn't really move significantly on the case.
Yeah. And it's got to be frustrating as a family to watch the case start off so hot with potential and then dwindle down to where, nothing new's coming in.
Yeah, so much promise. And then, as you said, even with what we had, it just didn't turn out to be anything.
Is it true that your family learned that there was no reports or anything advancing the case had been updated or written since 2010?
Yeah, that is my recollection. I mean, obviously, because the only way we found that out was because they sued, Joyce and Drew sued the Orlando Police Department to get the records. Because over all those years, at some point, the request was, make it a cold case so that other agencies could take a look, other resources could be applied, different sets of eyes could be put on the case. And they refused. They continuously said that it was an active case. They were actively following it. There was a full-time person assigned to the case. And it wasn't until they got the records where they saw that you're right, there wasn't one entry in her files from about 2010 or 11. I can't remember the exact date. Your date's probably the accurate one, but that's a long time. I mean, 8-9 years later, because they sued in, I think they began the process in 2017 through a public records request, initiated the lawsuit in 2018. And I know the records came in dribs and drabs, not quite meeting the 120-day agreement, but ultimately, I think for months that followed, they began to get these records, and then the team that they had assembled from private investigators to lawyers and so forth, looking at these files, that's when they became aware of the fact there wasn't one entry in the file.
That's got to be frustrating, almost as if it wasn't updated or new things done over that time period.
Exactly. I mean, I think that's when the level of frustration just really, I know when I heard it, I was completely deflated. I'm sitting there thinking, listen, we all can appreciate, we support law enforcement. We can all appreciate agencies being understaffed, under-resourced. But why tell a family things that are not accurate? I just don't understand that, because, and I think early on in the case, because as you had pointed out correctly, that we were doing everything that you could humanly think possible to do, that had it been clear from the beginning that they were not able to dedicate the time or the resources that they would have liked to, we could have gotten our own investigators earlier on to track people down and to do what, to do whatever. So you wind up missing opportunities when you don't have the full information.
So these documents, these reports that the OPD wound up handing over, were these things that you gave to other agencies or to a private investigator? What was the purpose of getting these what were you going to do with them? Yeah,
Joyce and Drew wanted their own team to cull through those records. And so that was done. And, the next pitch was the Florida Department of Law Enforcement had agreed to take this case for years. It was just that OPD wasn't willing to turn the case over. So that broke on November 28th of last year when that case was transferred to the FDLE. So, Drew made clear to FDLE that their team had already culled through those records, and based on that, what was already known, what had already been reported on and so forth, they synthesized it and made it easy. So like, here's the Reader's Digest version of this. And then there were very specific things that they were asking FDLE to do, right? Which was, number one, meet with the family's investigative team. Speak to the individuals that the family's team had identified as probably needing to be talked to again. They were looking for all the evidence that had been collected to be resubmitted for a forensic review. They were looking for a review of the case files and the findings, especially the summary that had been provided to them. And, do that extra follow-up with the specific individuals who had been identified by OPD as being people that probably had knowledge or could shed light on what had happened. And so that's what was being asked. And now we're coming on almost a year this November. And my last conversation with Drew does not appear that they have made any significant progress on those limited areas that they were being asked to look at.
I have read that your family feels that right now is the best chance to solve the case. Is that because you feel that the FLDLE is going to handle the case with fresh eyes and really reignite the investigation?
So I would say yes, but just back that up a year. So that was we were probably the most hopeful last November. And personally, when Drew called to tell me, I said, well, I mean, first of all, that's great. I said, but now I've got to rewrite the last chapter of the book, because the last chapter was based on the information I knew at the time, which was that we were still looking for OPD to turn the case over. So it was written in a certain way to try to exert some pressure on them to do the right thing. So we had to rewrite that. So yes, there was a tremendous amount of hope, fresh set of eyes, a new look, a clean approach. We were very hopeful at the time. But now when a year has passed, and after being given a file, a set of, all the records that obviously OPD gave to them, but then the summary that the family's investigative team had prepared, we would have expected that we were further along today than we are.
And I know some of the things in the reports that were handed over in the case file were, photos of the car and whatnot. And in particular, the hood of the car, I know there was a photo of. Was there any indication by those photos what might have happened to Jen based off of clues that you can see in the photos?
Well, I'm pretty sure the photo you're referring to was shown on the news. But again, the photo said one thing, but originally we were told that because if you remember, they had, they released the car pretty quickly, after, the abduction and so forth, which was always a little surprising. You think, well, why wouldn't you hold on to the car a little bit longer? But it was turned over a little bit more quickly than I think probably would have normally been done. But if you're being told that there was nothing of consequence found in or on the car, well, all right, that makes sense then. But then you get the photos and you see, based on the construction going on, there was dust on the car. And then you see a pattern that appears to be like a struggle might have taken place, or somebody was certainly laid either on their back or on their front, right, on the hood of the car. That kind of, I think we would have responded a little bit differently if we had known about that years earlier. And it's like, what else was it that we weren't fully aware of that might have changed the way in which we might have been, where the family would have been proceeding?
Yeah. And obviously getting your hands on all that material, all of a sudden you start seeing things that you weren't aware of, or things that you might have assumed were happening that evidently weren't.
Correct.
Yeah.
That was disheartening. I mean, I'm not, we can't lie, but that's just the plain out disheartening, sure. To be told one thing and then to find out the opposite was true. It's just because, I mean, again, we're sitting there essentially helpless in the sense of we've done everything that we can do. And my brother-in-law, to his credit, I mean, Drew, I don't even know how he has held it together, but he has. Because it's been an insurmountable fight to just try to keep Jen's story in the news, keep people focused on doing what they can do, and then to find out that nothing was really being done.
Definitely sounds like it would be disheartening. One of the names that's sort of been leaked out or kicked around as somebody that might have been looked at or should have been looked at in this case is a name that keeps coming out, is Chino. Can you talk a little bit about that person and why that person's name keeps coming up?
Well, again, my understanding was that he was in probably a supervisory level on property during the time of the construction and conversion of the apartments to condos. And so he would have been intimately aware of, right, or should have been. So we have to presume that he would have been intimately aware of all of the people that were on property, the various workers and people that were doing whatever they were supposed to be doing. And so whether he was directly involved or not is a question, but I think the belief had always been is that he should have been able to, and probably still can, shed light on what actually happened, because he would have been in a position to either know or hear of or know about. And then there was, I don't know if you were, followed it, but Christina Corbin did a podcast called The House of Broken Dreams, in which she basically went from the very beginning of the case and brought it forward to, I believe it was around September of 2021, I believe it was. And in one of the episodes that she did, she actually went to his house and spoke to him. Now, obviously, didn't get his permission to use the footage, but in that, my understanding is in that conversation that she had, there was a couple of times that he was about ready to say something, and then it just abruptly stopped himself. So I think there's still a reason for him to be on the list of people that really needs to be followed up with. And then it's just a question, and I write about this. I mean, what does it take for someone's heart to break to the point where whatever it is that you may be holding on to, that you're willing to let go of, so that you can help a family out that's looking for answers?
Yeah.
And so you wonder whether the fear of speaking up is so great that you stay silent. It boggles my mind.
Sure. Even if he's not directly involved, if he might have information about who he may be afraid.
Yeah.
For one reason or another to say something.
Years, it's crazy.
I had read something that there may have been some undocumented workers that were hired to work there, which would make tracking them potentially, if they didn't stay in the United States. Is that accurate? And did police ever go looking outside of the United States for potential suspects?
Well, again, to my knowledge, we were on property. We saw a lot of people. What had been said was that many of them were undocumented. Many of them might have been day laborers. But the other thing that was somewhat frustrating is at some point that many of the people that would have been Spanish speaking were not interviewed. And so, so as you go back to the 0 to 60 idea here, where there's an accelerating pace at which, people are on property, dogs are walking. Many of these people that had been observed there in the early couple of days or so, you didn't see them anymore. So there was lost opportunity there as well. They just never showed up again. You didn't see them.
And do you feel that? There are people still around that are in the area that can be talked to, that should be talked to again? I know we talked about Chino. Maybe he should continue to be talked to, but are there any other people worthy of talking to that you know of?
My guess is yes, because I know when I was talking to Drew about this, I mean, some of these folks are still in the area, or they know where they are. So it's not like I think that many of the people just passed or something like that. So probably anybody that had originally been identified as or who were talked to or interviewed probably is still around. That would be my guess.
So I guess, where does the case stand right now? What's the very latest as far as the case overall?
Yeah, I mean, the very latest is my conversation with Drew on the 25th of September. FDLE has it. They're not really saying much, and so we're not materially further ahead than we were from November 28th of last year till the 25th of September. I guess that's the polite way of saying it. We had great expectations, and maybe that's on us. There's sometimes we have to recognize that we can set expectations for others. And then when it doesn't get delivered, we get disappointed. But we're not in control of what they do. And I think that's becoming clear that at this point, all these years later, you're solely dependent upon other people to do the right thing, do what they're tasked to do what they're asked to do what they're responsible for doing.
Man, I don't think anybody can fault your family for getting excited, saying, hey, we haven't heard anything in all these years. Now maybe we're going to hear something, for you to get excited about that. I don't think anyone would, say that you're out of bounds by doing that.
And as we were talking earlier about attending the crime conference in Orlando back the weekend, was it the 22nd to 24th, that Friday through Sunday? My wife Debbie and I were probably never more excited and encouraged by what we saw, heard, and literally palpably felt being there and seeing this community, this true crime community, with the care and compassion and desire to want to help, to do whatever they can to help families see through resolution on the cases of their loved ones. We were just completely overwhelmed. And so for your listeners, if they have not attended a crime conference, attend. It's going to be in Nashville next. I think it's in end of May, early June next year. We're going to be there again. We were just blown away. This is a vibrant community of people. My understanding was it's just under 6,000 people were in attendance. These are people that care. And they want to contribute. They want to help, just like like you and your associates that do the investigative work that you all do. This is important. And I think more families that are going through these processes need to be aware that, you're not alone. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of various organizations, probably across the country or the globe, that are doing the kind of work that you're doing. And I think it's important because I always have looked at situations and say, well, we can be either overwhelmed by the enormity of the situation, or we can say, let me do for one what I wish I could do for many, right? Because if we get paralyzed, we do nothing. But if we say, maybe I can't help everybody, I can help one. So thank you and your associates for helping the one. So each case that you take on, that's your one, and you do what you can to try to help that family. And I think if more and more people did that, we could make a lot more progress.
Yeah, absolutely. You can never have too many allies in these cases to help spread the word and get advice and share information. And hopefully that leads to, a greater possibility that these cases are solved. A lot of the cases we talk about on this show are cases that have gotten little to no attention from the media. And Jen's case has been the opposite. It's gotten a lot of attention. But sometimes I think having so much attention leads to bad information or incorrect information being out there. Are there any inaccuracies or just flat out things that are bogus or wrong that have been out there that you and, Jen's parents have heard and had to deal with? Any of that you'd like to clear up once and for all?
Well, I think Drew has done a pretty good job of clearing a lot of those up on the various things that he's been on. I will be, very frank. In the early days of Jen's abduction, when I would watch any of the shows that were covering her case, the level of what I'll call sensationalizing it turned me off. I think I personally wasn't in a frame of mind that I could do that. And so I really have not followed her case or a lot of other cases online just because of that experience. I've now since, as I shared, I've now since learned that isn't the current state of the way in which true crime is being handled, by media and by a lot of the podcast organizations. It's being done with care, compassion, and really with the intent to help. So that I'm grateful for. But I know that Drew has addressed some of these inaccuracies numerous times. So I can't think of any that he hasn't already talked about.
Okay.
There always is. It's just always, there's just always, you have psychics coming up, they know exactly where she is. They know exactly what happened. And it's just, $5,000 or whatever, we'll give you the information. It's just, that's the level of insanity, is the kinds of things that people do.
Yeah. And unfortunately, these cases bring out the best and the worst people.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that brings me to the book here that I want to talk about before we wrap up. You wrote a book called Aftermath of Jennifer Kesse's abduction and Huckel's quest for understanding, and inspiring life lessons. Tell listeners, if you will, about the book, what's in it, and what inspired you to write it, and how long did it take you to write it?
Well, the inspiration was, I mean, during this period now, I guess we'll call the COVID era, right? Because everybody got shuttered down, had a chance to really be thinking a lot about everything that had been transpiring. And I began to realize that the kind of the journey or the quest that I was on to try to make some sense out of a senseless situation, I needed to share it because I wanted to inspire hope for other people. And it doesn't matter whether it's something of the magnitude of Jen. It doesn't matter, what the circumstances that are causing a pain or suffering or sorrow in our lives are. But we all need we all are going to be seeking hope. I mean, we want to be hopeful. We don't want to feel hopeless, or we don't want to feel helpless. And so that was really the genesis behind writing this book. But I also, in talking with Joyce and Drew, I was really clear that they have a story to tell, and I hope they will tell it one day because it needs to be told. But so the focus on the book, the operative word aftermath, is really what happened after the abduction. Jennifer's abduction was a catalytic event in my life that caused me to really think long and hard about my life to that point, where I was going, and I didn't like it. And so I set off on a different journey. So I share what that looks like very vulnerably and with authenticity, with the hope that someone that reads it will say, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe he shared that or shared this." And that is some of the feedback that we've received already. In fact, this book came to be because of a family friend who was working for a publisher in Maryland, New Degree Press, posted something on Facebook that my wife Debbie read, and she said, "This looks like this could be something that would help us get this book out there." And so I talked to Katie, and she referred me to Georgetown University's Creator Institute. They had a program that was run by a Professor Eric Koster to help people actually take ideas and get them to a finished book. And so I interviewed the third week of January of 2022, and he said to me, at the end of our hour or so interview, he said, "If you do everything we ask you to do, you will hold a book in your hand a year from now." And it turned out to be true. It was a very principled, guided, structured writing and community. You had editors' support through the entire way. And I can remember one of my first editors saying to me, "Does your wife know what you're writing? Because this is, you're sharing a lot about your personal life that I would be surprised at." And I said, "Well, the truth is we lived it. Second, we've shared that with community groups that we've been part of. So this is now just another level. We're gonna write about it so that other people can become familiar with it and hopefully take some action from it."
Wow. And so it seems like a great accomplishment to write a book and something about something so close and personal to you too. Where can people find the book and pick up a copy?
Well, it's Amazon for sure, and then obviously through Ingram Sparks, just about any bookstore it's available. Because again, the way they do print on demand anymore, you can pretty much get the book anywhere. I also have a website, billgilmore.com, and if somebody wanted a signed copy, we can do it that way. But I think that the subtitle of the book is really important because as I started to really unpack what I went through, I realized that my life was intersecting with other stories of people who overcame really amazing stories in their own right. And I said, this needs to be part of this book. So the book evolved to a point where it includes other stories and how I intersected with their story at some level. And some of them are really unbelievable. I mean, that people have been able to overcome unbelievable circumstances. And then now that ripple effect of positive encouragement continues, whether it's the founder of Flick Shop or whether it's the founder of Charity Water. There's just, it was actually very encouraging for me as I was writing it and then telling their stories as well.
Yeah. And it's definitely, anyone interested in this case should definitely pick up a copy of this and read it. We'll definitely share the link to the book in the notes so people can easily find it and pick up a copy. As we wrap up, I want to find out where you personally are and the rest of your family as far as hopefulness that this case is going to be solved one day. I know you mentioned that your hope was renewed back in November of last year, but it's dwindled down. But overall, when you hear about cases being solved 10, 20, 30 years later now, does that still keep your family hopeful that you're going to find out what happened here?
Yes. And I think, again, one of the benefits of being at CrimeCon in Orlando this year was to just see what is currently being done. What's the state of technology? And I think I was really excited about what's happening in the realm of DNA, genetic forensics, genetic genealogy. I mean, there was at least 5 people, whether in law enforcement or just, people in the podcast world, that stopped by and asked me if I was familiar with a company called Parabon Nanolabs, which I wasn't. I am now. But when they said, well, what they're capable of doing is taking the DNA and creating a 3-dimensional image. As soon as I heard that, I mean, literally my heart just started to jump. I'm like, this could be the break that we need. Because for the reasons we talked about earlier, about that person that's face is blocked by the fencing, if there's if the DNA evidence that the FDLE currently has can be used or worked on by these private companies, and we could come up with an image of someone that could make a huge difference in the way in which this case proceeds. So, yes, I mean, the answer is yes. I came away from that conference more encouraged that there are possibilities. And it's just a matter of getting the focus and the attention to move it in that direction. And to that point, I did speak to one of the representatives, Othram. One of the DNA companies was basically on the same side, just like a booth away from me. So I got to talk to those folks. And I know from researching on their website, they've already done work for the FDLE. So I'm certainly hopeful that we can encourage FDLE to look at these private firms and provide them with whatever information that they have that may help take this into a completely different direction.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on to discuss Jen's case. You've been a wealth of information, and I wish the best of your family. I hope that you find out what happens, and we're going to definitely do our part to spread the word and keep it out there, because somebody out there has to know something, and hopefully they do the right thing and come forward, and your family gets answers once and for all.
Thank you so much.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Missing Persons. If you can provide any information to help solve the case we discussed in this episode, please contact the appropriate authorities.
If you enjoy this podcast, please take a moment to tell your friends about Missing Persons and invite them to listen to the show. Word of mouth will help us grow and bring these cases to a larger audience. You can also help us by taking a moment to rate and review Missing Persons on the platform you're listening to us now on. Just a reminder that new episodes of Missing Persons air every other Saturday. If you want to find us on social media, we're on Facebook at facebook.com/missingpersonspod. We're also on Twitter with the handle @missing_pod. And of course, you can find us and contact us through our website, missingpersonspodcast.com. On behalf of Jess Betancourt, this is Mike Morford saying thanks, and we'll see you next time on Missing Persons.